Hey guys, this is Phil with the Minuteman Moment. This week, we're going to continue doing things a little bit differently around here. I'm very lucky to be speaking with a friend and colleague, Tom Jones from the American Accountability Foundation. He's the founder. The purpose of the American Accountability Foundation is to look into nominees who have been tapped to head up federal government agencies and also work in those agencies. So before we get into the topic of today, which is David Chipman, who Joe Biden has picked to lead the ATF, I just want to give a minute for Tom to introduce himself, sort of say what he does, where he comes from, and why his work is so important for all of us.
Hey, Phil, thanks a lot for giving me the time. As you said, I'm the founder of the American Accountability Foundation. And what we've been looking to do is kind of fill the gap on the research side in the conservative movement. The left has been doing this for ages. They've got Crew, they've got American Bridge 21st Century. They got all these groups that dig into our guys. What we look to do is kind of step in and do that research. And I've been doing this research either on the Hill as a staffer for Jim DeMint and Ron Johnson for about 13 years, and then off in professional politics where I ran an opposition research shop. And, you know, we're exactly what you think of. We're the guys that kind of dig through the documents, do the background research, find the tidbits that help tell the story about nominees. So I've worked on everything from, county council races up to running the opposition research campaign for Cruz for president in 2016. So I'm doing that now for the conservative movement. Spent the last month learning a lot about Dave Chipman, which wasn't a lot of fun, but good work. So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk today.
No problem. Would you say it's fair to say that nothing becomes public that somebody wants to hide unless someone like you is looking for it?
Yeah, exactly. Like, you got to have somebody doing the work. It's, I tell folks my work's kind of a combination of research librarian, private investigator, and political hack. And you kind of have to have that combination of being the nerd that's willing to kind of sit down and flip through the papers and go through, Dave Chipman's 2 divorce records and look through all that stuff to find something that's important. Go through 1,100 tweets to find the one that really tells the story that they don't want told because they try to make it go away by blocking their tweets. But yeah, without folks doing this work, it just doesn't happen. Like, Dave Chipman's not going to magically say, hey, I just want to remind you that about 6 months ago, I was talking about how we should defund the police. Like, he's not going to do that. It needs somebody digging into that for the movement. So
that's good. Guys, this is good, important work, and I hope you enjoy our conversation today with Tom. So let's focus a little bit on the hearing. I don't know when this will be posted, but for us, it was yesterday. And let's talk a little bit about that. My takeaway was Dave Chipman came off as not just a gun grabber. We knew he was that, but he is more radical than anybody could have possibly imagined. He basically said he wants to put the standard AR-15 223 into the National Firearms Act. In your research, what else can you tell us about somebody who's admitted to having this sort of radical position on guns?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I think kind of Ted Cruz characterized the Biden administration perfectly when he said boring but radical. And Dave Chipman fits that mold. So I think it's kind of a couple different things that were important that kind of came out of the hearing yesterday. I've been spending a lot of time talking to Chipman's peers, his subordinates, his supervisors. And what I learned from them is everybody said, yeah, Chipman's a super smart guy, extremely arrogant, thinks he knows best, and doesn't listen to direction. I think that's what we saw come out yesterday. I think the other interesting thing that we discovered yesterday, though, was Dave Chipman doesn't have a deep technical understanding of firearms. Despite working 22 years at ATF, yeah. This is a guy, he was asked for a definition of assault weapons and kind of mumbled and came up with a whole bunch of different stuff and left it with everything above a 22 that's a semi-automatic that has a detachable magazine. That's crazy.
I think this is the exact same problem that Chuck Canterbury, who was President Trump's nominee to head the ATF, he had many problems. One of them was he clearly was not ready for the job. He didn't have a technical understanding of not only firearms, but also how the ATF works. Chipman may know how the ATF works, but he's clearly not ready to think through the technical aspects of all of this. You're absolutely 100% right. Couldn't answer Senator Kennedy's question about defining an assault weapon. He absolutely blew Senator Cotton's mind when he was talking about the weapons that should be within the NFA. So he's clearly not a guy with a deep technical knowledge. There was an interesting exchange that he had with Senator Hirono of Hawaii. Hirono is somebody that, she is very big in, the Me Too movement.
Right.
That's very important for her. So What did you discover in some of your work about David Chipman with regards to his past and who he is as a person?
Yeah, so like I said, I've been spending time on the phone with people who've worked with Dave, whether they're people who supervised him or people who were in the same office with him. And unfortunately, what I've heard from multiple folks, and this isn't just kind of one guy that's got an accident, I've heard multiple folks, that Chipman's had a problem dealing with women when he worked in the office, particularly when he was in headquarters in D.C. back in the kind of the early mid-2000s time frame, and also kind of problems with EEO type complaints. Really seriously troubling stuff. That's why we're trying to get those documents out of ATF on Chipman's personnel record. We've seen really sloppy vetting in other nominees by the Biden administration, so we're not surprised that Chipman got through probably without a really thorough look at his background. But we're really concerned about things we're hearing from folks that we've talked to. It's kind of funny, like if some of my friends were up for a nominee for position in the federal government, there wouldn't be any shortage of people who would say about my coworkers, yeah, that guy's awesome, I'll write a letter. Like there'd be hundreds of letters coming in on behalf of kind of the people I've worked with in my career. Dave Chipman was only able to scare up 8 letters of endorsement from former ATF agents. And it's kind of funny, but like,
That's pretty bad.
Really, like you work in an agency for 22 years and you can only find 8 people who will vouch for you.
Ballpark, how many should we have expected to come out of the woodwork and support him if he were a decent guy?
Oh, there should be dozens. Like it should be one letter that's just like 7 pages of like signatures of people, really trumpeting what an excellent agent he was, what a fine leader, this is the kind of guy we need for ATF. I think that's one of the important issues that worth talking about more. Is the reason that Dave Chipman's up for ATF director is not because of his deep knowledge of firearms regulation and explosives and law enforcement. Dave Chipman's up for ATF director because he's a liberal ideologue who's aligned with Giffords and Mike Bloomberg and that part of the world. And that's why they're trying to put him in there, not because Dave Chipman's the best ATF agent and deserves badge number 1 at the agency. So that part's really troubling.
It almost seems to me, to your point, this is about politics, right? President Biden wants to give a head pat to the anti-gunners who have been a big part of his Senate career, his presidential race, and now his presidential campaign. And he can't tell them no. He needs to give them, a little breadcrumb to make them happy. And so what are they going to do? They're going to put up David Chipman, who, as you pointed out, doesn't have a deep technical knowledge of the issue, clearly can't lead people within the agency, but he does check one box. He works for the gun grabbers. Exactly. And so this is an important part of Joe Biden playing politics with the ATF. So rather than, picking somebody who has a knowledge of how the ATF works, can lead it, has the respect of people, and could probably get more than half a dozen people to vouch on their behalf, we got a Giffords guy.
And so, that's kind of bad in and of itself. What's going to be really problematic is you couple that with Dave Chipman's kind of toxic leadership personality. He's going to come in and kind of knock things over, break things in the front office at ATF, and create this atmosphere where the agency's not about doing law enforcement. It's not about finding people who blow buildings up. It's not about finding people who are trafficking illegally in guns. What it is about prosecuting a political agenda. And look, if he gets the nomination, he's going to wreck the agency, and it's going to take years to fix all the damage he's done. And we're never going to get an agency that's going to be a truly leading law enforcement agency like it should be.
So one of the things that you've been writing a lot about is Chipman he's an ideologue, but he also wants to make a lot of money. Yeah. He's very transactional, right? So he has this very long career in the ATF. I don't know if you would characterize it as, meteoric, stellar, sort of run-of-the-mill. Middling? Okay, yeah. He's a middling character. Middling character in the ATF for over 2 decades, and then he finds a way to cash out. So what's the first thing he did to line his pockets with the anti-gun crowd?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, Swamp Creature 101 here. Like, this is
For those of you who don't know, the Swamp Creature is the guy who works in government for a few years and then goes to work for a lobby shop, or in this case, an anti-gun group, and uses the access and the relationships they built over the years to sell that to the private group to get laws passed or to get them access or just to get meetings. Swamp.
Yeah, it's super swampy. So what he does is he takes his 22 years as an ATF agent, kind of the imprimatur that gives to him, and goes to this company ShotSpotter and says, hey, I'm going to go take my bona fides as an ATF agent. I'm going to try to sell your product into ATF. They couldn't get ATF to buy it on their own. They still can't get ATF to buy it. and it's this technology that helps locate where gunshots are happening. But it's got serious problems with it. It's kind of funny. Chipman always talks about, hey, transparency. We need to know what's going on. ShotSpotter won't let any of their data out to academics to verify that it actually works. So they're selling.
Weird.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. So they're selling these $100,000, multi-million-dollar systems to big cities to detect gunshots, but they refuse to let academics actually verify that this thing actually works. So it's just extremely troubling. So we've got a request into ATF right now for all the correspondence from his wife, who works at ATF right now, about this program. They've got 2,000 pages of emails from his wife, who has nothing to do with any kind of procurement, but apparently is using her position to talk to others within the agency about this program. It's exactly the kind of swampy backroom deals that Americans just hate about government. And it's, typical of Dave Chipman.
In your research, you've actually got what looks like a page and a half of ShotSpotter being taken on by police forces and then almost immediately rejected. This sounds like a program that just doesn't work. And they're not saying things like, we liked it but can't afford it,
right,
or we liked it but it just didn't work for us. They're saying, they're to your point, they're arguing about there's no independent review, that it just doesn't work. It's not good for their city. It costs a lot. And yet Chipman used his decades of access to sell it to people through the anti-gun lobby.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, he's going into these big cities where, the administration is typically anti-gun. It's kind of the Mike Bloombergs of the world, and going to their police chiefs and saying, hey, I'm Dave Chipman, career law enforcement officer. This product's awesome. You should buy it. They go in and buy it. They spend, again, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. And then they end up on the other side and they're like, this has done nothing to reduce violent crime in our city. It's really, it's very much one of those critical failings of confusing outputs with outcomes. Yeah, they can tell you where the gunshots were, but the outcome of reducing violent crime and preventing homicides is not happening. It's just terrible. And Dave Chipman makes a lot of money doing it.
It makes me wonder, and you brought this up in one of the papers you've written, and folks watching at home, I suggest you go to BidenNoms.com, check out some of the work that Tom and his group is doing. It's unbelievable. They are unearthing stuff that you would not believe. It's all out there. Some of it isn't, and he found it. So good work to him. But you brought up something, which was Chipman has a habit of working in government and then selling that access for his own private purposes. Now he's going to go back in government, potentially, if he gets confirmed. So you brought up the question, who is he going to sell out to next and sell his access as a, let's say, one day former head of the ATF? That's a real open question.
Yeah, no. And, this revolving door just plagues Washington. Like, these guys go in there, then they go out and they make tons of money, whether it's on the lecture circuit or as a lobbyist. That's not what this agency should be about. This agency should be about law enforcement, about preventing crimes, and about investigating and prosecuting people after the fact. And it's unfortunate that Dave Chipman just doesn't fit that bill.
So I want to talk about two quick things. We've only got a few minutes left. The first is to sort of go back over Chipman and his lack of technical knowledge. We're going to talk about a 101 that he did for gun control. And the second is maybe you could just dig in very briefly on who he is as a human being, as a person, and sort of the trail of destruction that he's left in his life. Do you want to talk about this 101 course that he did? He created, well, I'll let Tom tell it.
Yeah, it's his presentation on assault weapons, and really the only kind of unifying technical characteristic is they're black and kind of scary looking.
Yeah.
And that was kind of what we saw yesterday at this hearing, was him kind of mumbling around, trying to come up with this definition of assault weapons, of these things.
Well, because it's not a real thing.
Right, it's not. No, it's this scary Washington fright term that, assault weapons, oogly boogly, these got to be terrible. If he slaps a wooden stock on it, it's the same firearm, but now it's not scary. Yeah. So this is kind of the typical presentation that he would do, and you give him something that looks like a street sweeper, and that's terrifying.
I like how he labels one just assault.
Just assault, yeah.
Just assault.
Just assault,
It's right there. It just says assault. I'm not sure if it does it on its own or if it needs to be turned on with batteries or not. But is it fair to say he's just making this up?
He is. It's just visually offensive. So maybe the assault is an assault on your eyes because it's just scary looking.
You would think somebody with his decades in law enforcement would have the technical knowledge
Right.
to make the case he wants to make for gun control using real terms. And yet he's not. So one, it makes you wonder if there's even a real case for gun control that is factually true. And B, whether or not he has the capacity to make the case without lying and making things up.
Exactly. I think yesterday was really important in the hearing because Dave Chipman's credibility comes from I'm the 22-year ATF agency.
Yes.
Like
I'm just a cop in the street guy.
Right. It's like it's his first name, former ATF agent. Middle name's Dave, last name's Chipman. What we saw yesterday was senators scratch below that and really start asking him details about what he should know as someone who worked in the firearms division. Like this was like, if Chipman was an explosives guy, maybe you'd be like, okay, I guess I understand why he's not versed on firearms. But like this was a guy that was writing letters, interpreting regulations on firearms for 2 decades. And he just was gobsmacked. He just didn't know it. So that's why these hearings are important. It's also disappointing that the way the hearing was structured yesterday is they put 5 guys on this panel. And if you wanted to talk about any other issue, you couldn't talk about Dave Chipman.
Yeah.
That's down in the weeds for folks.
Yeah.
But yesterday was really important because it showed you who Dave Chipman was. He was an ideologue, not a technical expert.
Yeah, it almost makes you wonder if he had somebody else do his work his entire career,
Yeah.
if he couldn't even do this. The last thing is, and then we're going to break, and thanks for all your time. I appreciate it. I know you're busy. Can you just sort of give us an overview, and you touched on this a little bit, as a person, right? Because who he is as a person in his personal life is going to bleed over into how he leads an agency. So if you're an agent in the ATF, if you're a police officer under his command, if you're just a bureaucrat in the ATF, how can you expect him to treat you as a person? Who is he? How does he treat others?
Yeah, I mean, this, again, talking to his colleagues, talking to people that worked with him, this is a guy, he was very much characterized as a my way or the highway guy. Again, everybody says Dave's a smart guy, and no reason to doubt that he's book smart. But if the direction from his supervisors was, hey, here's what's come down, here's the policy we're going to do, this is how we need to implement things. If Dave didn't agree with that, Dave kind of just went off and did his own thing, kind of had the pocket veto, and really didn't execute on what he was supposed to. This is a guy who's a GS-14, GS-15. I think there's a reason, and I'm getting down a little bit in the weeds, a reason he never made it to the senior executive service. When you become an elite manager within the federal government, there's this thing called the senior executive service, and it's really for the best managers. Dave Chipman never made it there. They kind of pawned him off on this fellowship at the end of his career. He got shipped back out to Detroit after having problems in D.C. This is a guy who just doesn't play well with others, and a lot of folks had a lot of problems with him. I think that's why you can only scare up 7 friends to say, hey, this is a good guy. It's going to be troubling, and it's going to trickle down throughout the agency. You lead by example. People take a cue from the folks at the top. And when the guy at the top is just somebody who's blowing things up and not listening to others, it's not good for a large agency like ATF.
I think you just made the case for why he's Biden's nominee. He's not an actual expert in the ATF. He's a political hack.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why he's here.
Exactly.
Well, Tom, I appreciate your time.
Hey,
I appreciate
thank you.
everything you and the American Accountability Foundation are doing. It's a great service to the country, not just to gun owners, but to everybody. So we're grateful for what you're doing.
Thank you. Good talking to you, Phil.
All right, guys, I'm Phil with the Minuteman Moment. That's it for this week. We'll be back. Go to the Gun Owners of America website, gunowners.org. Check out everything we have on Dave Chipman. Check out American Accountability Foundation. See everything Tom and his group are doing. It's a lot of good work, and we're happy to be doing it for all of you. So we'll see you soon.